Hello everyone, welcome back to the second video of course introduction. In this video we will basically discuss the key concepts of second language acquisition research. In the previous video we did give you an overview of second language acquisition research, and in this current video we are going to explain some key concepts usually discussed in second language acquisition. So first of all, we'll talk about second language acquisition as a uniform phenomenon. Next, we'll discuss second language versus first language acquisition. And next, we will discuss second language versus foreign language acquisition. Then we'll talk about the centrality of syntax and morphology in second language acquisition research. Competence versus performance will be one of the major areas of discussion in the second language acquisition. And finally, we'll talk about acquisition versus learning. As part of our key concepts in SLA, we'll also talk about the role of the first language, the natural order of development, contextual variation in language learner language, individual learner differences, the role of the input and learner processes. And finally, we'll talk about the role of formal instructions in the development of second language acquisition. The process of acquiring a second language is not uniform. Hence, second language acquisition is not a uniform phenomenon. It is also unpredictable because different learners acquire second language differently. The acquisition process of second language is influenced by two sets of factors. The first set include the learner related factors, and the second set include the situational factors. And these factors interaction produce the complexity and diversity in the process of second language acquisition. The study of second language acquisition assumes interest only if it is possible to identify some aspects that are relatively stable and hence generalizable, if not to all learners, at least to a large group of learners. SLA focuses to understand these general aspects. The next important key concept in the study of SLA is whether the processes involved in second language acquisition are similar or different from the processes involved in first language acquisition. Historically, second language acquisition research was heavily dependent on the studies done in the first language acquisition research. There was a common understanding that the processes involved in the first language acquisition are similar to the processes involved in second language acquisition. Therefore, to understand second language acquisition, we can study the processes involved in first language acquisition, and hence second language acquisition research tended to follow the footsteps of first language acquisition research in terms of methodologies and certain areas of concern. Although second language acquisition and foreign language acquisition are contrasted and thought to be involving two different situations, actually in second language acquisition studies it does not intend to contrast second language acquisition with foreign language acquisition. Second language acquisition is used as a general term that embraces both untutored acquisition of the second language in a naturalistic setting and tutor acquisition of the same language in the classroom setting. So SLA does not mean any demarcation or differentiation between the two terms. The centrality of syntax and morphology is one of the key aspects of the study of second language acquisition. Second language acquisition refers to all the aspects of language that the learner needs to master to acquire the target language. The primary focus of earlier SLA research was to understand how a learner acquired the grammatical subsystems and grammatical morphemes in the target language, and very little was known about the acquisition of the rules of phonology of the target language, and almost nothing was known about the acquisition of lexis. However, recently the SLA researchers have turned their attention to know how the learners acquire the ability to communicate and use their knowledge to do that. That means nowadays the researchers in SLA focus their attention towards communicative competence. Competence versus performance constitute one of the key concepts of second language acquisition research. Competence consists of the mental representation of linguistic rules, which constitute the speaker-hearer's internalized grammar, whereas performance consists of the comprehension and production of language. So what should be the ultimate goal of SLA research? Should it focus on the competence of the L2 learner, or it should focus on the performance of the second language learner? However, since the internalized rules of a language learner cannot be put under direct inspection, it is necessary to examine how the learner performs. Therefore, in one sense, second language acquisition research is about performance. When I was a student of master's, one of the senior professors in my institute was claiming that in the case of a second language, acquisition is not a feasible idea. A second language is always learned. That means in the study of second language acquisition, there is a debate between acquisition versus learning. Second language acquisition is sometimes contrasted with second language learning based on the assumption that these are different processes. Acquisition refers to picking up a second language through exposure, whereas learning involves conscious study of the target language. Often, acquisition and learning are used interchangeably. However, it is assumed that acquisition takes place in a natural setting, whereas learning takes place in a controlled setting. Acquisition occurs subconsciously or without paying much heed to the natural environment of interaction, whereas learning is a conscious process and requires much effort on part of the learner. Now the question is whether the distinction between acquisition and learning is realistic. Is it possible for a second language learner to acquire the language through learning? Does the first language play any role in the acquisition of a second language? To answer this question, we are going to introduce a concept called language transfer. According to this hypothesis, most of the difficulties faced by a second language learners were imposed by his or her first language. If a learner's first language and second language are different, his or her first language knowledge would interfere with the second language learning. Where the first and second language are similar, first language would actively help second language learning. So from this hypothesis, a procedure was devised which was called contrastive analysis. It is a procedure to identify the areas of difficulty that a second language learner might face. By establishing the differences between a learner's first language and second language, the practitioners often predicted the difficult areas of second language, and in the language syllabus, those areas were given a focal point of teaching. This is how the SLA researchers of early 1960s tried to address the learner's difficulty in learning a second language. However, in the late 1960s, the contrastive analysis hypothesis was rejected through empirical studies.